From 2010 to 2011, I exchanged the familiarity of rural life in Palmyra, Pennsylvania, for one teaching English in China. That year, I called the city of Zhangjiagang my home. Zhangjiagang was an hour's drive from Shanghai, but was considerably smaller and more laid back than its bigger and far more well-known brother. My initial introduction to Zhangjiagang was exciting. Everything was completely new. There were new places to see. There were new foods to try. And yes, there were more than a few signs with comical English translations. This euphoria eventually gave way to the familiarity I'd come to know back in the States. It had even gotten to the point where the local restaurant owners knew what I wanted without me even having to ask. To avoid boredom, I spent much of my free time exploring the city by foot. On one particular day, I decided to walk north for 2 hours, regardless of what lay ahead. I started off at the school and journeyed forth. As I ventured further, the skyscrapers gradually faded into the background, giving way to the countryside. When I first heard the people of Zhangjiagang talk about the countryside, the images that came to mind were of sparsely populated, wide open spaces, characteristic of farm country back home. My expectations, however, were turned completely upside down upon laying eyes on the dwellings outside the city. What I saw was more akin to the suburbs. Homes placed side by side followed a muddied canal and stretched for miles. Still, there were a few surprises here and there that reminded me of the countryside back in the States. I continued following the pavement alongside the canal for about 1.5 hours until the sun finally began to set. Because streetlights were few and far between, and also in part because my leg muscles were beginning to ache, I decided to turn around and make my way back home. Within minutes, however, I noticed a young man and his mother from along the path, standing outside their home, their eyes fixed on me. Assuming Westerners seldom visited the countryside, I stuck out like a sore thumb. To break the awkward silence, I greeted them with a "ni hao," which is Chinese for hello, and I half expected things to end at that point because of the language barrier. Expectations were overturned yet again, and my eyes widened when the young man responded with a hello and began carrying on a conversation with me in full-fledged English. Because it was getting late, he invited me into his home to share dinner. Even though accepting such invitations from strangers is considered a no-no in America, the sincerity of his welcome and the warmth in his eyes convinced me to take him up on his offer. Plus, after 2 hours of walking, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't worked up quite an appetite. The young man told me his name was Zhang Liang, and after eating, he began to tell me more about himself. He had studied art and was eager to show off some of his artwork. Among the pieces he showed me was a little grasshopper crafted from sheet metal. It was amazingly intricate, complete with functional, articulated legs. Before the evening was over, the family invited over their neighbor, a Chinese English teacher named Ming Fa. She had been on a trip to Los Angeles the previous year and wanted to discuss her experiences with me. Chinese New Year was on the horizon, and before all was said and done, Ming Fa had asked me if I would like to share in the festivities with her family. Thrilled and honored at the same time, I replied with an enthusiastic yes. Because it was all but pitch black outside by the time we were finished talking, Ming Fa was kind enough to drive me home in her car. Although I was still exhausted from the day's journey, I was so excited that it took a while to fall asleep. Eventually, the big day came, and I again walked through the countryside to reach Ming Fa's home. Her mother pulled out all the stops, treating everyone to a feast that would put most Thanksgiving dinners to shame. There may not have been turkey, but there was duck, roast pork, lamb, fish, shrimp, and yes, even chicken feet were on hand to sample. When we finished eating dinner and the skies had darkened, we went outside and were treated to a feast for the eyes. One of my students described Chinese New Year to me as being Chinese Christmas, and it's easy to see why. In place of St. Nick's twinkling lights, there were sparklers and fireworks blasting from every possible direction within the community. Ming Fa pulled out a giant sparkler and offered it to me. However, my nerves got the better of me and I politely declined. Imagine my surprise when they handed the lit stick to her 2-year-old niece. She waved it back and forth without much trouble, though admittedly I breathed a sigh of relief when they put out the sparkler. When we were finished with the sparklers, the best was yet to come.